And now a real treat, surprise, Richard and Jane. Ben Resnick is going to give the drash today and then lead us in Musaf.
Thanks, Manny, and thanks to Rabbi Graber for sort of inviting me to do this. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've been coming to this shul for, well, like 15 years now, and it's a great pleasure to give this in honor of my father-in-law, Richard, who's been a member here for something like 60 years. Not quite. So thank you for having me. So for many years, I thought I was going to get a PhD and be an academic, because when I was about 10 or 11 years old and it dawned on me that the ship had sailed on me playing second base for the Cubs, being a professor was the next most adventurous and romantic job I could think of, because I had a very particular kind of upbringing, and I watched a lot of Indiana Jones. And I thought to myself, how else can you decipher and share ancient magic? And how else could you crack open the Aron Habrit? And how else could you get to the bottom of great mysteries? And how else could you fight Nazis? And how else could you kiss pretty girls? And in one order or another, these things have been and remain some of my primary concerns in life. And so for a long time, I thought I was going to be a professor. I have since been cured of that delusion. Some of you have not been, and that's okay. You can email me, and you guys don't have a Misha Berach list here that you read, but at our shul we do, and I'll add your name to the Misha Berach list. Anyway, in those days, at some point in college, I read a great book called Faces in the Clouds by a religious anthropologist named Stephen Guthrie, who, like a lot of religious anthropologists, tries his hand at defining what religion is anyway, and argues, in many ways very persuasively, that religion can be described as, quote, systemic anthropomorphism. Systemic anthropomorphism. And his argument is basically this. He says, anthropomorphism, by the way, meaning the attribution of human characteristics to things or events. And he says, and I think this is a very profound thing, he says, I claim we anthropomorphize because guessing that the world is human is a good bet. It is a bet because the world is uncertain, ambiguous, and in need of interpretation. It is a good bet because the most valuable interpretations usually are those that disclose the presence of whatever is most important to us. That usually is other humans. Faces in the clouds. And he says basically that the clouds roll by in an endless ribbon, circling the world overhead like white parchment. And because they're all we have to look at, we start seeing patterns and faces, and we start to derive meanings, and we experience revelations. The fact that I know that these may be products of human cognition and human imagination does not make them seem any less real to me. And perhaps, after all, that is the only way that the universe speaks. Here's what I saw this fall as the clouds of the parchment rolled by. On the week after October 7th, I read Breshit, which thrust us into a dark and formless void. A few weeks later, as Israel mustered her troops, Avraham mustered his, going off into battle with courage and conviction in order to save Lot, who had been taken hostage. A few weeks after that, Yitzchak contended with the rising specter of anti-Semitism, as Avimelech and his shepherd says, Lech me'imanu, get away from us. Ki atzamta mimenu me'od, you have become too great for us, too big for us. Which the 15th century commentator Yitzchak ben Moshe Arna reads astutely as a classical anti-Semitic libel, understanding the word mimenu hyper-literally, which can mean from us, but can also mean from our greatness. In other words, the age-old claim that Yitzchak's success is not a product of ingenuity, but that it was somehow vampiric, that he was stealing from the people around. Then came the Yosef stories, which, just a few days after the tragic death of 3 hostages from Israeli gunfire, offered up the chilling verse, Vayaker Yosef et Echav. Yosef recognized his brothers, Vehem lo hikiru, but they did not recognize him. And now Vayechi, a parsha that marks an important shift in the Torah's perspective and the scope of the Torah's vision. The story of a family that begins with Avram and Sarah and ends with Yosef and his brothers is drawing to a close, and we will soon shift our attentions from questions of family to questions of nation and peoplehood and duty. Year in and year out, as the scroll rolls by, I find this transition jarring and challenging, and ultimately, I think, somewhat mysterious. This sense of non-disclosure, the sense of the text holding something back, is somehow amplified by the peculiarity and complexity of the brachot, if indeed that is what they are, that Yaakov gives his sons before he dies. And it is reflected in a classical and poignant midrashic idea, which is quoted by a variety of the Parshanim, that imagines Yaakov calling to his children as he's sick. He says, He'asfu, gather around. Ve'agida lachem et asher yikra etchem b'acharit hayamim. Let me tell you what's going to happen at the end of days. And here, the Midrash says that at this very moment, whether because of his age or his failing health, or because we are just not supposed to know what the future holds, here the Shekhinah leaves him, and he can no longer